is Sean from Nine the Gallery, here to introduce Jillian Bennett's new series, A Fragile Existence. Hi Jillian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is really exciting to talk about your work, and really just a few questions I want to get started with. First question that I really wanted to know is, how do you connect with your work?
A lot of my connection comes through the process itself, and it sounds cheesy to say it's all in the journey and not in the destination, but it really is, especially in this particular series. It's a lot about the process and sort of dealing with the strokes and letting there be some sort of ambiguity with it and some bit of control, but letting it go a little bit.
So I've seen a lot of your work in different colors. This is what you've chosen to just do black and white. Why did you choose just black and white?
I chose to keep it very simple with the colors because I wanted to focus more on the concept of it, and I feel like when I minimize the amount of colors, it's more of a transitory explanation of a landscape rather than a more defined and more permanent translation of a landscape.
I couldn't agree more. I love the starkness. It really kind of has that gravity. It's saying a lot with very little. In some of your abstract work, I've seen, and we've talked about this, the influence of Heather Day in your work, which I think is incredible. She's one of the most influential new artists, especially in an abstract realm. How has she inspired you as an artist?
I honestly never have really been into abstract before, and when I saw her work, I really enjoyed the way she used simple forms and played off of colors. So I used to do a lot more black and white pieces with charcoal and chalk, and it was a lot of very expressive marks, but always forming a big contrast in an image. And I liked the way she sort of simplified everything. So I'd actually carried into this current series where I was really working on trying to simplify my message and my image rather than going more into fine details.
It is a great example of a really good, strong influence from left field, and you didn't there's no copying. You've just absorbed it and taken it in like every other great artist that's ever lived.
There's a few artists that have influenced me in sort of very subtle ways, but you know, it changes your mind a little bit in how you create your process and everything like that.
What if you had to have a short list of other artists that, contemporary or not, that have really have given you some life and really pushed you forward?
Well, one of them was Reem Bassous. She was actually one of my professors at University of Hawaii, and she was one of the big influences on my process of deconstruction and reconstruction and not being too delicate with everything and kind of letting yourself make mistakes. And then upon that process, you end up making a very tactile, thick, mark-making image that has a lot of history and a lot of layers. And a big influence in my work is Ansel, the photographer. His photography of landscapes was always poetic and very majestic and sort of ethereal in a way. So a lot of that influenced me to do, you know, these big grand landscapes with dramatizing the grandness with the tiny little human or tiny little waterfall in the distance or something like that. While working on it, during the process, it was a very calming and meditative sort of process compared to some of my other stuff, which was kind of getting out some emotions and really being energetic with my mark making. And this was a much more intentional and intricate way of the process. It is influenced a lot by Taoist paintings, where it's just these large landscapes that are meant to be meditative in a way.
One of the things, if anybody's ever watched because you're really good at making time-lapse videos and kind of showing your process. You're really open about it, and I think a lot of people respond to that. One of the things you're going to see is that a lot of the times you have earbuds in and you're clearly listening to something. So what are you listening to?
Actually, during this series, it was a lot of 07 and Air on repeat.
Like
I'm
second generation trip hop. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it is true. I really am affected by the music I'm listening to at the moment. I mean, there's been days or pieces or series that I've gone through where I was mostly listening to music like Sigur Rós, and it's just like this very transient, music and these big landscapes. I just, like I said before, it's meditative. So funny thing is, I actually sometimes will wave and say bye to the world and then put my headphones in and then I'm gone.
Right.
So
we'll see you later.
music's a huge influence when I'm working, that's for sure.
That's awesome. I think so many artists do have that experience, and it's really important to connect with that, to have that inspiration, to have that other channel of creativity to kind of work with, much like you're doing one thing, but you need that other.
Yeah.
So excellent. Well, Jillian, let's dig into your work and take a look at them one at a time. The first one we're going to look at is called Breaking Point.
Breaking Point was one of definitely the larger ones of this series. I sort of chose the subject matter being a mountain peak of snow, and sort of that real big contrast of this dark landscape and then the peaks, the white peaks. I really wanted it to sort of be a portrayal of a fleeting moment, but recognizing that fleeting moment, like the breaking point where you're sort of actively conscious in your experience. Something that happened to me at one point was being in the mountains. There was a blizzard the day before, and it was just, you could barely even see the actual peaks. It was almost like it was just cream. And I remember thinking, one day I'm gonna be thinking about this moment and how crazy it was and how quick it was and how this memory pops up years and years and years later. And you're sort of thinking about how crazy it was that at that moment when you were younger, you were thinking about how you were gonna think about it then. And it's sort of like a breaking point in time where you kind of recognize, oh, this is a fleeting moment. I'm gonna catch my memory right now and see if I can bring it out, again later.
What a cool story. And a lot of your work does have that threshold moment to it. Really these moments where there's transition, or there's like something is grown or birthed into something bigger, like an understanding or experience or an enlightening. So next question, let's talk about Delicate in Time.
But this one, I wanted the peak to almost be a portrait, those old-time portraits people would take of themselves or their family, and it's sort of like a nostalgic touch to it. So I wanted this mountain peak with snow on it to be a nostalgic portrait of a basic mountain peak, and sort of give you the sense of impermanence. It's not permanent, it's temporary, it's transitory, and here's a portrait of it, an old-time portrait of it, taking you forward in time but back in time as well.
Well, it's that Taoist influence, right? It's that.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredibly Eastern about the series, which does resonate for a lot of people. Let's talk about Threshold.
So Threshold is obviously inspired by Taoist paintings as well. I wanted it to be the feeling you get when you see something so majestic. For me, it was being in front of the valleys in Hawaii. You see these giant peaks and these deep, deep, deep valleys. And in there, you're sort of almost drawn into it. You kind of want to step over the line to go into it, but you sort of sit there and enjoy and admire the wholeness of it, the presence of it, rather than going into it. I wanted it to be that feeling of just before you're about to step in. It's pulling you in just by it it being so open and kind of mysterious, but welcoming in a way.
For me, it looks like the difference between within and without.
Yes.
Because within, that's when you step in. But without, you just are that observing.
Yes, exactly. You're an observer. You're observing it, and then there's that threshold between being an observer and being
participant
in it.
So moving right along, tell us about the break at pre-dawn.
The break at pre-dawn is sort of that experience of being on the water's edge before the sun has risen, and the most you can make out is the whitewash of the waves, and you can barely see the horizon line. You can feel the world sort of waking up, but it's so slow that you almost don't notice that morning is on the edge, and before you know it, the sun is there and it's bright and people are up and about. It's a welcoming feeling, and it's sort of an exciting feeling, and it's when you're up before the sunrise, it's kind of a special moment. I feel
it's so impossibly quiet, and it changes so much faster than you expect it to.
Exactly.
So fantastic. So Jillian, tell us about Twilight Falls.
So this piece is about this sort of fascination that I have with waterfalls. In a lot of my pieces, you could see this giant landscape, and then all of a sudden, if you look really close, there's this really skinny little waterfall. And there's a reason why I put waterfalls into a lot of my work, is because I find them incredibly fascinating. The fact that you can see these giant waterfalls that have been there for centuries, and they've just carved and carved and carved and carved into the earth. And water is it's a soft yet powerful and very strong element that can be so dainty and so delicate, but it can have this huge impact. And just doing that little line, it changes the whole landscape, because if you look at the landscape without the waterfall in it, it kind of, oh, that's the landscape. It's, maybe this big. But when you put the waterfall in, you realize how much more bigger the perspective is. Those small moments that are so small, but they're so impactful and so powerful and so important to the whole grand scheme of things.
Jillian, tell us about shifting tides.
So in surfing, we always have that moment when the tide is changing, and it's that sort of in between is sort of your quiet time, sort of waiting for the next full tide to come in or come out. But it's that waiting period between tides in tide change. It's sort of that moment where you need to pause, and there's not much you can do except wait. You know it's going to change. You know that it's going to take a bit of time, but you also can't do anything about it. So you might as well enjoy the scenery.
So Jillian, tell us about Day Water Mountain.
This one was definitely influenced by some of the more abstract work I've been seeing, and simplifying the forms and really playing with the water coming off of the brush. So actually with this piece, I put down some of the first layer, and then I actually picked up the paper and moved it around to be able to get it to make certain shape. And this image came to me when we were driving back from California to Phoenix, and it was one of those crazy stormy monsoon weather where it's just the rain looks like it's just a whole solid thing across the landscape, and it's sort of moody and dark, and you're sort of just driving down the freeway and you see just full flat landscape and these little peaks, and then this just giant dark cloud over everything. I wanted to play a little bit with how the water went off onto the paper and try and capture that really dark moment.
Well, Jillian, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been a pleasure to get to know about you and your work.
Thank you. It's been really fun. I'm glad we got to do this.
Just a reminder, Jillian Bennett's series of Fragile Existence is on sale now at 9thegallery.com and artsy.net. Print it. Time for a glass of wine.